It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote luncheon speaker, Daniel Mayer, CMO and SVP for Products of Expert System Enterprise. He joined Expert System following its acquisition of Temis, and I keep remembering him from Temis, so he was VP of Product and Marketing there, where he shaped and promoted the award-winning Luxit line of text analytics products. He's got 20 years of experience in marketing and product strategy throughout the IT value chain, and his passion is in crossing the chasm by helping organizations leverage technologies that deliver significant business value. And today he is going to speak to us about AI and the future of knowledge. Daniel.
Thank you very much, Mary D. Can you guys, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I hope you're having a great lunch. I won't be having that pleasure. When the team asked me to present at lunch, I thought I'd choose a topic which is as fun as possible, and so I'm going to try to participate in the great human game of predicting the future. So thank you for your help with that. Expert System is a software vendor focused on AI and more specifically natural language processing. Just wondering out there who has already used natural language processing in the room. A few of you who has ever heard of natural language processing. A few other people. Okay, wonderful. We've been recognized by the market, both analysts and customers throughout the industry. Here's a representative sample of some of our customers. The top third of the slide is really information providers, and the bottom rung is public sector and enterprise. And I would say the top players, have a distinctive role in this slide because they serve the bottom. They create applications, they create data, they create services for the bottom rung. So I'll make a little distinction in this presentation between these two areas. I don't know if you guys know a gentleman by the name of J.P. Rangaswamy. J.P. Rangaswamy is currently Chief Data Officer at Deutsche Bank. He used to be Chief Scientist at Salesforce. And a few years ago, he did a blog post and subsequently a TED Talk called Information is Food. J.P. Rangaswamy is one of my personal heroes. That blog post, that TED Talk are absolutely brilliant. If you don't know him, I encourage you to look him up. When I read that blog post and saw the subsequent talk where he spoke about how he saw information and in a larger sense knowledge as food for our organizations, he drew that parallel in his talk. That triggered a set of questions in my mind, and one of them was this one. Are there any parallels that we might find between the way innovation in food production has played out in the past and the way innovation in knowledge production is playing out today and in the future? So I'll start by looking at some aspects of the past. This is a very quick 3-picture summary of 12,000 years of history. Remember, we're playing this game of prediction. So if we look back in the past, the first attempt at improving productivity in agriculture involved something called the ard, which was a hoe, in other words, a stick that was used to dig trenches in the ground and sow seeds and hopefully be able to get more wheat, essentially, and other crops produced. Subsequently, we invented other forms of innovation, such as domesticating animals to pull the hoe, which then became a plow. We then created iron plows, subsequently steel plows, and ultimately, towards the end of the 19th century, we invented machines which use steam and today motors, combustion motors, to pull these plows. All across this innovation effort, productivity gains were tremendous in the harvesting of crop. And I'm sure you're sensitive to the topic of productivity gains, and we're hearing today that machines are going to replace humans. And you might think that productivity is a zero-sum game, And if you have farmers 12,000 years ago who became suddenly much more productive, well, you should see the number of farmers decline over time. That would be sheer logic. However, the numbers don't play out that way. And that's a kind of interesting insight, I think, that we can garner from history. Originally, around 10,000 BCE, we believed that we had a population, total population of 1 to 5 million humans on Earth. Most of them were involved in farming one way or another. And we have reliable numbers regarding the number of farmers starting in the 1300s. We believe that we had in the range of 10 million farmers in Europe alone in 1300. And by the 1800s, we had in the range of 67 million farmers, again, in Europe alone. So actually, you can see from these numbers that even though productivity went through an enormous boost throughout this innovation effort, the number of farmers increased over time. I'm sure you may have a thought about why that happened. Of course, it goes back to the notion of elasticity. Productivity gains in farming created a situation where food could be produced at a lower cost. And that triggered higher demand for food and increases in the general population, which pulled the number of farmers forward. Very simply, productivity drove lower cost, higher demand, and hence an increase in the number of farmers. Let's look at this phenomenon in a bit more detail before we switch back to knowledge production. New methods in agriculture created greater productivity, gave us an ability to harvest at a greater scale, also gave us time surplus. Time surplus, in other words, we could spend our time doing other things than just harvesting food. Higher production on a per farmer basis, larger cropland exploited led to more food available, and then food surplus. Food surplus created a situation of dependability and better survival chances and enabled us to settle down instead of moving all the time to get more food. It's kind of a side matter, but this led to the creation of cities and ultimately to major changes in our social organization and in our civilization. Going back to food, improved nutrition, improved fertility led to population growth, and population growth and time surplus led to even more innovation. And this was a virtuous circle that explains the numbers that we saw in the previous slide. What if we had new methods to harvest knowledge and exploit knowledge the same way that we developed new techniques to harvest food? What would that mean? Let's do the same diagram looking at knowledge. So greater productivity, greater scale, and time surplus. Time surplus for knowledge workers. Higher output of knowledge per knowledge worker, and the ability to exploit the things on the right that, of course, everybody talks about, big data, big content. Today, with automation, it's possible to exploit big data and big content. But does it stop there? I don't think so. I think we will be producing, thanks to these techniques, more knowledge than ever. I've termed that big insight, so I'm not only participating in the game of prediction, but also the game of naming. So I think this will lead to bigger insight, more dependable knowledge. You remember in the other diagram on the left, this led to cities and the ability to settle. I've been thinking about what bigger knowledge and dependable knowledge might lead to. I don't have the answer. If you guys have a guess, that would be really helpful for me to fill in the box on the left. But I suspect that in the same way that our increased ability to produce food led to civilizational changes, I believe that more knowledge will change our civilization for the better as well. Going further, I think for the enterprise, improved intelligence, greater insight into the competitive landscape, into understanding customers, understanding domains, that will lead to smarter decisions and better economic outcomes, and ultimately cycle back into more innovation. So I think there's possibly a strong parallel to be drawn between innovation in agriculture and innovation in knowledge. With natural language processing, we're extracting insights from language, from text. I think we can harvest these insights faster. I think we can deploy knowledge at a greater scale into our processes. I think we can spend less time collating the data and more time on analysis and decisions. And I think knowledge is going to become more inexpensive, and that's going to lead to a higher demand for knowledge. Ultimately, it's going to reduce, in the same way that productivity reduced malnutrition, I think it's going to reduce malknowledge, if you excuse me. So for those of you who've never seen natural language processing, it helps resolve textual ambiguity such as the one that you can see here. Two sentences using the same types of words, apple, stock, very difficult problem for a computer to understand what's being said in both of these sentences. Is it the same thing? On the surface, it's the same words, so it could be the same thing. Of course, we know that it's not the same thing. Natural language processing helps machines resolve such ambiguities to extract unambiguous meaning from text. And these are the insights that I was talking about a few minutes ago. The way this is used in industry, really, if you want to simplify it to the extreme, is two things. Productivity, thanks to automation. Machines step into knowledge activities where in the past only humans could handle them. Now machines can do some of this. And second area, taking smarter decisions with smarter data and smarter applications. Let's look at what this means in the enterprise. Smarter applications, the mother of all use cases is search, so smarter search, analytics, recommendations, linked data, better understanding of customers, competitors, optimizing your R&D. All of this is being driven today by smarter applications. It boils down to faster and easier access to the relevant information and an improved ability to take key decisions in your business. From a productivity standpoint in these workflows, it's about introducing acceleration thanks to automation. Many different processes can benefit from this. I'll show you an example later. You're simplifying and accelerating the work of human operators. You're reallocating their time to the most critical parts of their tasks, taking decisions. So let's look at a few examples. You've all seen a search interface, I believe. Anyone here never seen a search interface? Okay. This is a faceted search interface. So you can see facets here which are built with a terminology of sorts, a taxonomy of sorts. So you can navigate by category. You can navigate by subject term. I've highlighted the word Turkey, which is slightly ambiguous. Is it the country? Is it the animal? Ultimately, these facets and this type of search help you locate the relevant documents faster. That's the key word is faster. If you look at this portal by Sage, we spoke about this on Monday at length with our customer. They built a recommendation engine. This is another way of using natural language processing, comparing documents, finding documents that are relevant to the same subject matter as the original document across a repository. That's made possible also by natural language processing and metadata. Here's a more advanced example of, instead of having to read the documents, you can actually ask a question and get an answer, okay? This, I think, is where a lot of these applications are going, and it's the theme of smarter applications. So we built this portal which is focused on clinical intelligence for pharmaceutical companies. One question that you can ask, for example, is, who is doing research on Alzheimer's disease? Instead of having to collate the information, read through all the clinical trials, and come to the conclusion yourself, the interface tells you that these are the companies that have the most clinical trials ongoing for this topic. So you get the high-level answer immediately. You can still dig into the documents if you need to, but you don't have to anymore. And that's an order of magnitude faster compared to what you had before. Who are the leading experts in Alzheimer's? Same thing. The portal application will give you the list. Then you can dig in if you want, but you have the answer immediately. Another question, when are competitive products being launched for Alzheimer's? You can get a timeline that shows when these other products are going to launch in the market. You can get that in a snap, of course, because we built the application to provide those answers very quickly. I'd like to mention our customer Dow Jones, who are processing 1.5 million articles of news per day with our technology. They're classifying these articles into a DGID taxonomy, which includes 3,000 categories. And they're doing this at the sub-second per article in their professional information business division, which includes Factiva. They're also extracting special interest people who are deemed to be involved in corruption activities, trafficking, money laundering, and so on. This is an essential capability to enable financial institutions to track these people and avoid doing business with them. Their statement is that AI is critical to address their business at scale. That goes back to the notion of scale. This is one of the things that they've been working on, which is aggregating insights from articles to create knowledge graphs. Let me show you an example here. All the names are fake here, but the actual underlying matter is correct. ABC Therapeutics was a pharmaceutical company developing this drug called JRA15. This came from news articles. Subsequent articles revealed that a company called Cellstat was partnering with ABC. A company called Marchem signed an agreement to supply key components to ABC. And lastly, a company called Biomed Group acquired Marchem. You can see on the right the subsequent graph that's being created as all this information comes in. This is done not by hand, this is done automatically with natural language processing. A last article came in revealing that the FDA was placing the approval of this drug on hold. The question is, who's going to be impacted by that decision? The answer is in the graph. It's not in any of the articles. None of the articles say Marchem is going to be impacted, Biomed is going to be impacted, Cellstat is going to be impacted. It's not in the articles. Nowhere is that said. It's in the graph. By piecing together these insights one by one and creating this graph, the system draws that conclusion in a jiffy. So that's the power of graphs, and I think graphs are going to be a bigger part of smarter applications in the near future, also powered by NLP. In my last example today, I want to show you something which is maybe less familiar than portals and information products for most of us. And it deals with process automation, which is a big phenomenon in the market today. And we see it in a big way in insurance. Insurance companies have two key processes. One is underwriting, securing new customers, writing policies to provide coverage. And the second is claims management. Claims management is the activity which deals with what happens when you have a problem, you have a car accident, you have a fire, you have a flood, and that's the process through which you get reimbursed. Both of these processes are the most important processes for an insurer. If we look at the claims process specifically, it costs in the range of 10% of revenue for insurers. Underwriting costs in the range of 10% as well. Commissions represent 10%, and payouts, believe it or not, in P&C, on average, cost 60 to 70% of their revenue. If you add those numbers up, you can quickly figure out that insurance is a money-losing activity. Actually, I forgot to mention, there's a third process that's really key for insurers. It's investing your premiums. When you pay your insurer to cover your car and so on, they invest that money, and they make 10 cents on the dollar. So that's where they earn their profitability, essentially in investing, not in insurance. Let's get back to claims. Claims is a slow process. It's a very costly process for these folks. If you think of workers' compensation, you have an accident in the workplace. If you think of bodily injury with auto accidents, there's a lot of documentation that comes with that. It can be hundreds of pages, and you have people called claims handlers who are on the phone with you, and they're receiving this data. They have to understand what's going on in your life. They have to piece together the information. It's medical reports. It's ambulance reports. It's a description of an accident given by police. It's a demand letter that your lawyer sent to them because you're asking to be really reimbursed a lot of money for this accident. That takes a lot of time to piece together. In some cases, it takes 3 to 5 days per claim over the life cycle of the claim. So that's a lot of time. The goals of these insurers typically can revolve around automation, streamlining the time necessary to review these claims, accelerating cycle time because customer satisfaction is very closely tied to the time required to resolve claims, avoid fraud, and so on. So this is a first diagram, of what an accelerated process for claims review looks like. In the middle, in blue, you have natural language processing, classifying all the documents I was referring to, analyzing the data in these documents, piecing the information together, and presenting that to the right claim handler by routing the documents to the right team. This is what it looks like in reality. The data obviously has been anonymized. If you want to zip through the demand letter, it's maybe 10 pages long. You click on the demand amount, that's highlighted immediately in the text. All the description of the accident is highlighted. All the medical data, ICD codes, which describe the injuries, the treatments that were given, the names of the medical providers, all of that, as well as other types of information that I've not represented here, are presented to the claim handler. So instead of having to do all that work himself or herself, piecing together the story of the accident, and keep in mind these documents filter through sometimes over periods of months, so there's a lot of context switching involved. Everything is done for them, presented in a front end, and they can therefore take a decision much faster and avoid all the collation of this data almost entirely. So that's a first way of doing it, but it's going further. It's going in a direction that I think we can call a smart workflow, where the machine is going to recommend reimbursement. Okay? Instead of just figuring out the details of the case and presenting them, business rules are going to reason on that. And of course, in the more expensive cases, the claim handler is going to stay totally in control. In some cases, they're going to investigate. They're going to call you back. They're going to ask you questions. So that's a human process. However, some of our customers are already working today on what they call straight-through claims handling. So in other words, for the simpler cases, low severity, you have a scratch on your car, that's not going to go through a human handler anymore. That's going to be entirely automated. So that's where insurers are going with claims handling. Full automation for the simple cases, and keeping handlers involved and focused on the higher added value of those tasks when the case is complicated. So I can hear almost some voices in the room saying, okay, so where are all the humans going to go? I'm going to get back to that in a second, but I'd like to highlight on this process that we see here that every step in blue requires some form of classification, some form of organization of information through taxonomies, thesauri, ontologies, and so on. You also need business rules, of course. Another capability in the technology is to detect inconsistencies. So here's an example of inconsistency in an accident story. In the first case, one document says that the customer was driving through that street. The second document says, well, actually, he was stationary when the accident occurred. So that's a small inconsistency that could be, attributable to nothing in particular, or it could be an attempt at describing the accident in a way that's maybe, promoting the idea that you should be reimbursed because it's not your fault, but actually it was your fault. So in some cases, inconsistencies like that point to fraud and suggest, the claim handler should be alerted to this, investigated further. This is just to illustrate a further capability of the technology. Our customer Zurich Insurance has deployed our technology in several of these processes, as well as in underwriting. This is one example in the UK where they were able to reduce by a factor of more than 90% the claim review time. So in this process, claims handlers are still in the process, but the time has drastically receded by almost a full hour here to review these claims. This comes from an investor presentation last year where they announced that they performed significant cost savings thanks to this project, as well as significant reallocation of the time of their claims handlers. My next to last slide really is to show that all of these applications will share a very similar pattern, okay? Whether it's search on the left, towards the right, including more and more intelligence, going towards analytics and visualizations, or even decision-making systems, all of them are going to use a variety of techniques that we group under the name AI. One of them being natural language processing, dealing with language, dealing with the way humans communicate knowledge and information, so it's a key part of it. And all of that is driven, beyond the database, beyond the triple store, is driven by data models and schema. And these schema are taxonomies, ontologies, and so on. So those pieces are absolutely essential for all of this to happen. To conclude, I wanted to leave you with a few crisp predictions. So my predictions, no timeline, is that AI will accelerate and reduce the cost of creating knowledge. Of course, I'm talking about knowledge in the larger sense, knowledge with a big K, scientific knowledge, but also enterprise knowledge. It will enable knowledge at scale. We've seen examples in these slides, for example, with Dow Jones, how you can process massive content with these technologies. It's going to enable our organizations to understand their environment better, whether it's the customer, whether it's the science behind your product. It's going to enable better decisions. Ultimately, I think smart applications and smart workflows like the ones that we saw in the previous slides are going to become ubiquitous. And all of us in this room stand to benefit because the demand for knowledge management and data modeling skills is going to multiply to support this transition the same way that the number of farmers multiplied throughout the history of innovation in agriculture. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions. I don't know if there are any questions in the audience.
Okay, does anyone have a question in the audience? And if you do, you're going to have to speak very loudly so we can hear you up here. Okay,
We
go.
can't see you because of the spotlights, but we're all ears. Right, thank you. I think the question is about information overload and how do we mitigate that. I think it's a great point. Part of the implications of the surplus that we observe with content and information is, I agree, a degradation of the quality of information access. It's kind of a paradox, but I think that a big part of what we do and what all of these techniques enable is to organize information and to serve it in a way which is not only more efficient but also more relevant. So we have many examples of that with our customers, and I would like to hope that we can overcome that with these technologies as well. Sure. All right, well, if you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm around, and feel free to email me. We'd love to have your thoughts on this as well.
Okay, thank you very much.